The Western Front of World War One was a main theatre fought during the Great War. This area would see fighting from the start right the way through to the armistice on the 11th of November 1918. Various new military tactics were employed here for the first time, and it would be the setting for the first tank battles in history. The intense fighting and horrific living quarters faced by the troops stationed there would see it go down as one of the worst places for a soldier in modern military history. But just how bad was the day-to-day life for the troops? In today's video, we look at the conditions of the Western Front during World War One. The hostilities for the First World War began in mid-1914, and by the 2nd of August, German forces would push through Luxembourg and Belgium. As they continued to push forward, they would move into France, eventually being halted by French and British forces, within around 50 kilometres or 30 miles of Paris. This would be the First Battle of Marne, with thousands of casualties seen on both sides. The Germans would be forced back and eventually set up defensive lines near the Aisne River. This would be the beginnings of a static system of trenches, from the English Channel right the way down to the French-Swiss border. For the next few years, little distance was gained by either side. This would be the Western Front. Best case scenario for a soldier fighting on the Western Front would see them only spend a few days a month on the frontline trench. This trench line would be the closest to the enemy and require the soldiers stationed there to concentrate for long periods of time, often in horrible conditions. Depending on the time of year, trenches could be completely flooded with water. This was especially true in places such as Passchendaele in Belgium, because of the combination of wet weather and the low-lying area being reclaimed marshland. The risk of a fungal infection known as trench foot was ever present. If bad enough, it could lead to gangrene and eventually amputation. It was caused by feet being constantly immersed in cold water, which despite pumps being used to drain the trenches, was sometimes unavoidable. The sheer amount of mud which often stuck to every part of their uniform meant finding a dry place to rest or sleep was all the more uncomfortable. Rats were a regular friend for a frontline soldier. Due to the huge amount of casualties building up on a daily basis, these creatures were able to feast upon the decomposing bodies of the dead soldiers in no man's land. Finding shelter amongst the men in the trenches, they helped spread disease between these troops. Flies were also no stranger to the front. In the summer heat, they would become particularly troublesome. Lice was another issue, causing a common disease known as trench fever. Dysentery too spread easily, given the latrines were behind the main lines, so the men stuck in the front line trenches were forced to dig small waste pits to relieve themselves. So you can imagine once the trenches flooded, the contents of these pits would spread throughout the trench. The smell then was all too often overpowering for these men. Perhaps the main danger of the Western Front would be the enemy. For both sides, the risk of being shot by a sniper or being hit during a random artillery bombardment was ever present. Patrols into no man's land were common at night. This would usually be to locate any gaps in the barbed wire or identify enemy listening posts. Outside a major battle involving going over the top to attack the enemy en masse, trench raids were the other way in which troops would fight face to face. A raiding party of men would be sent out at night, perhaps with the task of capturing enemy prisoners for interrogation or capturing enemy documents. The constant fear for a frontline soldier then was being rushed by the enemy at night while you slept or were otherwise not watching the line. But the incessant shelling from artillery was an ever constant all along the Western Front. Millions of shells were fired throughout the war, so it's no wonder that these bombardments had a mental impact on the troops who survived. Gas attacks caused huge amounts of casualties. Soldiers holding flame-throwing weapons were enough for any man to fear stepping up to the front line. But possibly the scariest of all could have been those first troops to see tanks on the battlefield for the first time. Watching as their rifle rounds bounced off the tank's armour must have been terrifying. All in all though, the Western Front was a terrible place to fight a war in unspeakable conditions. The men who endured it were no doubt all victims of a tragic situation. What did you think about the conditions of the Western Front during World War I? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. As always guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you want to expand your knowledge and join the growing Premier History community.